My name is Ethan Parker, and before everything broke, I believe love was something you could build carefully and expect to last. Not because life was fair, but because effort mattered. I learned that belief early, in a small Texas apartment where the walls were thin and the nights were long. My mother worked shifts that blurred together, her exhaustion settling into the furniture as much as into her bones. Still, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, as though bitterness were a luxury she refused to afford. She never spoke about love like it was fragile. To her, love was sturdy, practical, something you showed up for even when it didn't reward you immediately. Work hard, she used to say while folding laundry late at night. Be kind, keep your word, and if you love someone, love them honestly. Those words became more than advice. They became architecture. I built myself around them. I didn't know then that some people grow in ways that pull them away from what once held them steady. I didn't know that love could remain sincere and still be abandoned. Back then, I believed staying was the most powerful thing a person could do. I met Emily Carter during my second year at the University of Texas in Austin, a city that felt alive even when it stood still. She sat near the tall windows in the lecture hall, sunlight falling across her shoulders like it had found its destination. She wasn't loud. She didn't try to be impressive. Yet people noticed her anyway, the way you notice a calm presence in a crowded room. I was the opposite. Quiet, observant, always tired. I fixed laptops at night to cover rent, learned to stretch money, learned to stay invisible. When we were paired for a project, I expected nothing more than cooperation. Instead, we talked, not about grades or deadlines, but about uncertainty, about the strange pressure of becoming someone without knowing who that person might be. One evening, as we walked beneath a sky fading into warm colors, she asked me if I ever felt like life was waiting for me to catch up. All the time, I said. She smiled, relieved, like she'd been holding that question alone for too long. That smile stayed with me. Love didn't arrive like a sudden storm. It unfolded quietly. Conversations became routine. Silences became comfortable. We learned each other's rhythms without effort. With Emily, I didn't feel the need to perform. I could simply exist. After graduation, I accepted a modest IT job in Dallas. Emily followed without hesitation. Our apartment was small and imperfect. The door stuck when it rained. The kitchen barely fit two people, but we filled the space with plans and laughter with belief. Some nights we sat on the floor, eating takeout, talking about the future like it was already ours. I don't care about money, she told me once, resting her head on my shoulder. I care about us. I believed her completely, because love, to me, meant choosing the same person every day, even when the world offered alternatives. Emily's job at the luxury real estate firm changed things faster than I expected. Her days filled with meetings in glass-walled offices. Her nights stretched longer. Her vocabulary shifted. Words like networking, position, potential entering conversations that once revolved around shared dreams. She fit into that world effortlessly. I stayed where I was. One evening, she stood in our narrow kitchen, heels still on, phone glowing in her hand. She looked around, thoughtful. "Do you ever want more than this?" she asked softly. I said I was trying, and I meant it. But the question lingered after she fell asleep, heavy in the quiet. For the first time, I wondered whether love alone could bridge the distance between two futures moving in opposite directions. The night I came home early felt ordinary until it wasn't. I heard her voice before she saw me. Relaxed, unfiltered. "He's sweet," she said, "but he's not really in my league anymore." Laughter followed. Not cruel, just careless. I stood in the hallway, the words settling into me slowly, painfully. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't been ready to face. She still cared, but she no longer believed. When I finally stepped into the room, she smiled at me the same way she always had. I hugged her back, pretending nothing had changed. Everything had. I met Richard Hale at a corporate gala hosted by Emily's firm. The room gleamed with glass, metal, and voices that carried confidence like currency. Richard moved through the crowd effortlessly. People leaned toward him when he spoke. Space opened where he stood. He shook my hand firmly. "So you're the software guy?" It wasn't dismissive. It was observational, as if my role had already been categorized and filed away. Emily was radiant beside him, not because of the dress, but because she looked like she belonged in that world. She laughed easily, spoke fluently, and carried herself with the ease of someone stepping into her future. As the evening wore on, I felt myself fading into the background. Not ignored, simply unnecessary. On the drive home, she stared out the window, thoughtful. "I don't want to struggle forever," she said quietly. I understood then that her fear was different from mine. She feared limitation. I feared loss. And those fears were pulling us in opposite directions. 2 weeks after the proposal, Emily asked for space. The words sounded harmless. Temporary. Reasonable. "I just need time to think," she said. "About everything." I nodded. What else could I do? When someone asks for space, refusal only accelerates the distance. I packed a small bag and stayed with a friend. Days passed. Messages grew shorter. Conversations careful. I still wore the title of fiancé, but it felt borrowed, like something that could be taken back at any moment. I told myself this was normal, that all relationships tested themselves, that love required patience. But patience doesn't silence instinct, and mine was screaming. The call came from a mutual friend. Her voice was strained, apologetic. "Ethan, I didn't know how else you'd hear." "Hear what?" "Emily's engaged." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated, disconnected from reality. "To who?" I asked. There was a pause. "Richard." I stood outside the hotel that night, staring through the tall glass windows into a ballroom alive with light and celebration. Emily stood at the center, elegant and composed. Richard slid the ring onto her finger. Applause erupted. I didn't go inside. I didn't interrupt her happiness. I simply watched the life I thought was mine move forward without me. And in that moment, I understood something painful and final. Sometimes love doesn't fail. Sometimes it's replaced. The days that followed felt hollow. Not sharp with pain, just empty, as if something had been removed and never replaced. I went to work, ate when reminded, slept when exhaustion forced me. Friends tried to help. Words blurred past me. At night, memories surfaced uninvited. Her voice, her laugh, the promise I thought we were building. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. I hated the quiet, the sudden absence of meaning, the realization that staying loyal doesn't guarantee being chosen. Grief settled into me slowly, like dust collecting on unused furniture. And somewhere beneath it all, a question began to form. If love wasn't enough, what was? Grief did not arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, settling into corners of my life I didn't know were exposed. Mornings became mechanical. I woke up, showered, dressed, and left the apartment without remembering any of it. Time moved, but I didn't feel myself moving with it. Food lost its appeal. Music became noise. Even silence felt heavy, like it was pressing against my chest instead of surrounding me. I stopped checking my phone as often. Stopped expecting messages that would never come. What hurt most wasn't that Emily had chosen another life. It was realizing that the future I had built inside myself no longer had a place to land. Every plan, every assumption, every quiet promise dissolved without ceremony. I wasn't angry. I wasn't dramatic. I was simply empty. And emptiness has a way of convincing you that this is all there is now. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of meaning. Friends invited me out. Coworkers checked in. I smiled when expected, spoke when necessary, and retreated the moment I could. Conversation felt exhausting. Explaining myself felt impossible. At night, memories surfaced uninvited. Emily's voice, her laughter, the certainty I once felt when she said my name. I replayed moments, not to torture myself, but because they were familiar. Familiarity felt safer than uncertainty. I realized then that heartbreak doesn't always demand resolution. Sometimes it simply demands endurance. And endurance, I was learning, is a skill. Daniel reached out on a quiet afternoon. He had been my mentor years earlier, the kind of man who spoke carefully but honestly. We met at a small park. The sky was wide. Children played in the distance. Life moved easily around us. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. "You look like someone who forgot he has a future," he said. I didn't argue. "Don't build a house inside your pain," he continued. "Visit it. Learn from it. Then leave." His words didn't fix anything. They didn't erase loss. But they did something else. They reminded me that staying broken was a choice I was making every day. And for the first time since the engagement, I considered choosing differently. Rebuilding didn't start with ambition. It started with order. I cleaned my apartment, opened the windows, let air move through spaces that had grown stale. I began running in the mornings, not to get stronger, but to remind myself that my body still obeyed me. Work became a place of structure instead of escape. I focused, learned, listened. Progress came quietly, without celebration. I began therapy. At first, silence filled the room. Then words followed. Grief finally had somewhere to rest besides my chest. Some days were better. Some were worse. Healing didn't move forward in a straight line, but it moved, and that was enough. Months passed, then a year. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly healed. I woke up realizing that the weight had shifted, that I could think of the past without being pulled under by it. Success arrived slowly. Promotions, new projects, recognition I hadn't chased but accepted. More importantly, peace returned. Not excitement, not triumph. Peace. I began to understand something I hadn't before. Loss doesn't only take. Sometimes it clears space. And in that space, a different life begins to form. Quieter, stronger, and finally your own. The life I built afterward did not arrive like a victory. There was no moment where I stood back and admired it. It grew the way trees do, quietly, patiently, without asking for recognition. Work became more than a place I went every day. It became a discipline. I stopped chasing validation and started chasing mastery. I listened more than I spoke. I learned to solve problems without panic, to fail without collapsing. Opportunities followed effort, not dramatically, but consistently. With each passing month, my confidence returned, not the fragile kind that depends on approval, but the steady kind that comes from knowing you can survive disappointment. For the first time in a long while, my life felt balanced. Not exciting, not empty, grounded. Emotional strength doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in moments you no longer react the way you once did. I noticed it the first time Emily's name came up in conversation and my chest didn't tighten. The memory still existed, but it no longer demanded a response. I noticed it when I stopped imagining what she might be doing now. When curiosity gave way to indifference. When peace replaced comparison. Strength, I realized, isn't about forgetting. It's about no longer needing answers. I was no longer the man trying to prove his worth to someone who had already left. I was simply myself. I was in San Francisco for a conference when I heard my name spoken in a familiar voice. "Ethan." I turned, and there she was. Emily looked older, not worn, but shaped by life. There was no dramatic moment, no shock, just recognition. We sat at a small cafe overlooking the bay. The conversation was careful at first, like stepping on a thin ice. She told me she was divorced. "I thought I wanted a certain kind of life," she said quietly. "I thought love would adjust." It hadn't. I listened without judgment, without resentment, and that surprised us both. "I should have been honest," she said. "With you. With myself." I nodded. Not in agreement, in acceptance. "I don't hate you," I told her. "I just had to learn how to live without the future I imagined." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. We weren't there to reopen wounds. We were there to acknowledge them. When we stood to leave, she hugged me, gently, briefly. Not as lovers, not as regrets, as people who had finally finished bleeding. When she walked away, I felt something I never expected. Gratitude. Peace arrived later than success, but it stayed longer. I moved through my days without urgency. I slept well. I laughed easily. Silence felt comfortable again. The need to be chosen faded. I had chosen myself, and that choice had held. I understood then that some relationships exist not to last, but to transform you. And transformation, while painful, is never wasted. I met Claire without ceremony. There was no dramatic introduction, no sense of fate announcing itself. We crossed paths in an ordinary way, a coffee shop, a shared table during a busy afternoon, a brief apology when she accidentally brushed my arm. She smiled, not out of politeness, but ease. Conversation followed naturally. Not probing, not impressive, just honest. She didn't ask what I did for a living until much later. She asked what I liked to do when no one was watching. What calmed me? What felt like home? I noticed how present she was, how she listened without preparing her response, how silence between us didn't feel like something that needed fixing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Being with Claire felt unfamiliar at first, not because it was difficult, but because it wasn't. There were no emotional tests, no uncertainty disguised as passion, no need to perform worthiness. She didn't disappear when things felt quiet. She didn't pull away when vulnerability surfaced. With her, affection wasn't a reward. It was a given. I realized then how often I had mistaken anxiety for intensity, how I had believed love was something you earned by enduring uncertainty. Claire showed me something different, that love could feel steady without being dull, deep without being painful, and slowly, I allowed myself to trust that calm didn't mean fragile. One evening, Claire asked about my past, not out of suspicion, out of care. I told her about Emily, about the life I thought I was building, about how it ended. I spoke plainly without bitterness, without the need to protect old wounds. She listened, really listened. When I finished, she didn't offer advice or reassurance. She simply said, "I'm glad you became who you are now." That sentence stayed with me. For the first time, my past didn't feel like something I had to overcome. It felt like something that had carried me here, shaped, but no longer heavy. I wasn't afraid of being left anymore, because I wasn't abandoning myself to stay. Love with Claire didn't announce itself loudly. It revealed itself in consistency, in mornings where we shared silence without discomfort, in disagreements that didn't threaten connection, in the absence of fear. I realized that real love doesn't demand urgency. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't require sacrifice of self to maintain closeness. Real love stays, not because it has to, but because it wants to. And staying, I learned, isn't about endurance. It's about alignment. For the first time, I wasn't building a future alone inside my head. I was living one, openly, honestly together. Looking back, I no longer measure my life by what I lost. I measure it by what I learned. That love can be real and still end. That ambition can coexist with emptiness. That heartbreak doesn't mean failure. It means transformation. I once believed that staying was the greatest proof of love. Now I know something deeper. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. Not in anger, not in resentment, but in understanding. The ending I begged life not to give me became the beginning I needed. And if you're standing somewhere inside your own aftermath, unsure of what comes next, know this. You're not behind. You're not broken. You are becoming. Somewhere ahead, a quieter life is waiting for you. One built not on fear, but on peace. I didn't leave Ethan because he lacked love. I left because I didn't recognize myself anymore. That's the part no one ever asks about. When I met him, I was still becoming someone. Still uncertain. Still small enough that his steadiness felt like safety instead of limitation. He listened. He stayed. He made life feel manageable. And for a long time, that was enough. Then my world expanded. Not suddenly, gradually. New rooms, new expectations, new versions of myself I didn't know existed. I learned how power moves quietly, how ambition disguises itself as growth. And somewhere along the way, I started mistaking momentum for meaning. Ethan didn't change. I did. And instead of saying that out loud, I let distance do the speaking. I told myself I was choosing a future, not abandoning a person. I told myself love would adapt, that he would adapt. He didn't need to. I did. The hardest truth came later, after the lifestyle, after the marriage, after the illusion collapsed under its own weight. I learned that stability is not the same as stagnation, and excitement is not the same as fulfillment. Ethan loved deeply, quietly, without conditions. I loved selectively, depending on who I was trying to become. That realization followed me longer than regret. When I saw him again years later, calm and grounded, I understood something painful and permanent. He had grown without betraying himself. I had grown by leaving. Some choices don't make you evil. They just make you responsible. And this is mine.